You are accused of something you didn't do, but if you claim innocence, you're immediately put to death. If you confess and turn in someone else, also innocent, say a family member or a neighbor, you're free to go. These are decisions 200 people in Salem, Massachusetts had to contemplate in 1692. Hey everyone, this is Kayla and welcome to Cauldron Convos. But let's start at the very beginning of Salem, okay? What was Salem before the infamous Salem Witch Trials? Salem was settled in 1626 by Roger Conan and a group of migrants, and it was actually named Namkiag, but the settlers preferred to call it Salem, which is ironic because that means peace in Hebrew. In 1628, Massachusetts Bay Company arrived and relieved the struggling settlement. But that's not what you guys came here for, okay? You came here for the meat of it. You're like, I want to see witches burned alive. I want to see witches' teats out here, okay? So we'll skip to the real stuff. So how did this happen, right? Like we've heard about it in textbooks. We might have watched the Crucible, maybe, seen the play even. How does this even start? Like, where does that even begin? In colonial America, belief in the supernatural was actually pretty common. So, for example, people would attribute things like failing crops, dying family, to witchcraft. I mean, if I could just blame everything on witchcraft, like, my boss gives me a crappy review and I'm just like, witchcraft. Like, your house floods, witchcraft. That's what they were doing out there in colonial America. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that's a pretty good excuse. Don't like a neighbor, just, hey, go burn them at the stake.
In mid-January 1962, that's not what I meant. I meant 1692. That would imagine. In 1962, this woman claimed that...
Yeah, they were just burning all the witches in 1962.
Honestly, wouldn't be surprised. But in 1692, Elizabeth Betty Parris, a 9-year-old daughter of local Reverend Samuel Parris, and Abigail Williams, the Reverend's 11-year-old niece, became the first to be diagnosed with kind of being afflicted by witchcraft, having crazy fits, screaming at the top of their lungs at literally nothing, claiming, witchcraft.
That just sounds like every other 9-year-old I've ever met.
Really?
Just screaming.
Oh, I don't even know the last time I saw a 9-year-old, but next time I do, I'm going to be like, are you going to scream? Like, that's stupid. The girls even contorted their bodies into odd positions, made strange noises, spoke gibberish, and seemed to be having what they called fits. They keep calling it and referring to it as fits. Like, I have a fit nearly every day of my life. Like, the chicken on my salad, not cooked enough, fit. Like, boss cancels a meeting 5 minutes before and I purposely prepared for it, fit. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't shocking to me. I have fits on the daily. This isn't like surprise. You're not cool, Abigail Betty or whatever, Betty Parris. Okay, just because your dad's the Reverend, you think you're better than me? You're not better than me. Let's keep going with
There's
this.
been multiple times you've just run in the room and started yelling in gibberish.
Yeah, maybe it's you. He's the one, everyone, he's the one that's possessing me or whatever. We gotta hang up. Also, will YouTube flag this for me being like, hung, they were hung, hangings, hung, huang, burned at the stake? Like, will they be like, demonetized? I don't know. This is my first time kind of doing this topic. Usually I just talk about, I don't know, Jeff Wittick and Tana Mongoose. Late February 1692, so like a month and a half or so later, when traditional medicines and prayers, everyone's at their Betty, oh please Betty, come back, stop having these fits, Betty, we love you so much. They failed to cure the girls, obviously, not obviously, that's my opinion, but the Reverend, aka the father of the girls that were screaming, well, one of the girls that was screaming uncontrollably, asked for help from a local doctor named William Griggs. And William Griggs, if you're watching this, or if you're not an ancestor, what's it called? A descendant of I got it, thank you. A descendant of William Griggs, you suck. Because this guy diagnosed these girls with bewitchment by saying they were under an evil hand. Like, literally, it was like, they're under an evil hand. Dude, you're a doctor. Like, you should know better. This isn't an evil hand. This is called mental illness. This is called little girls off their rocker. Or what's the opposite of a rocker? A crib. That's right.
On the crib? What? What's the opposite of a rocker? I don't know.
Like, when old people are off their rocker? What about a 9-year-old? What are they off? They're off their fidget spinner. Stupid. They're off TikTok. Stop. My age is showing. Then after, William Griggs had to give his 2 cents into it, other girls, including Ann Putnam Jr., who was, 12, casually just 12, all these girls being like under 13, and Elizabeth Hubbard, actually, I spoke too soon, she was 17, but still, not an adult, also started showing symptoms of these fits, contorting and screaming at the top of their lungs for no reason. And upon interrogation, the girls named Tituba, aka my favorite queen in this whole thing, Betty's family slave, and Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne of the one who caused their fits. Tituba is an interesting woman. First of all, no one knew... Shut up, squeaky face! Tituba was a key and interesting player in the Salem Witch Trials, to me personally, and some other people that read about her in articles, books. For one, she was the first one to be accused in Salem of witchcraft, which is pretty interesting. And also, no one knows her last name still. No one knows exactly what her backstory is, where she came from, all of that. So it is a bit mysterious. And additionally, it's mysterious why the girls would accuse her of witchcraft in the first place.
Yeah, it's not only mysterious, but I'd also say it's pretty tragic.
Definitely. The girls worked and prayed alongside Tituba. She grew up along their family for like at least a decade. I don't know why you would just go out there and be like, Tituba did it. She's, the devil's in me because of her, and whatever they claimed. Like, that's sad. And also it was shocking that she was accused because apparently New England witches were traditionally not people of color. So people were kind of confused, why is Tituba possessed or whatever? Why is the devil in her? Or why is she playing with the devil or whatever it may be? So on February 29, 1692, an arrest warrant was issued for Tituba alongside Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, the 2 other women that were kind of, apparently not huge people in the community. No one really cared about them. That's kind of sad. Like, and that's kind of sad that they were known for that. Like, just poor people that no one really cared about. So, when they were accused, it's like, who cares, right? Like, it's the 3 people that you would most likely to vote off the island anyway. Like, let's get them out of here. That's what, hey, the documentary said that. All 3 were examined the next day by 2 magistrates. Okay, it's so funny because, like, today, if you're like, charged with something or whatever, I feel like you have so much time.
Yeah, years. And
it's like this is with all of these cases in the Salem Witch Trials, it was literally like, you're accused of witchcraft. Next day, like, you're tried, and then if you don't pass the witch teat test, which we'll talk about later, little teats, you get hung, baby. You're hung.
Interesting. It's a point you didn't really. It's interesting.
Okay.
A point you didn't really specify was that these are very easy targets. I mean, a slave and 2 very poor individuals and people that don't have any social hierarchy. I mean, if you're going to be accusing anybody of witchcraft and no one's going to go to bat for them, those are the people.
True that. Ooh, interesting. I like where you're going with that. But Tituba, my queen, she's so smart that she ended up confessing for this, even though she didn't do it, and accused Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good of being witches. So she's like, you know what? One of us going down, it ain't gonna be me. It's gonna be the 2 of you. That doesn't make sense. The math's not adding up there. But anyway, she was like, I'm gonna be free.
It wasn't
You're
me.
Gonna go. What?
It wasn't me, like this song. Like, she just started saying, it wasn't me.
It wasn't me.
Caught him doing witchcraft in the barn.
It wasn't me.
Doing witchcraft outside.
My kids. It wasn't me. Or not my kids. Betty Parris. It wasn't me. Caught me brewing a stew. It wasn't me. Okay. Got a witchy teeth. Okay. So Tituba was even, like, she started describing their spectral movements, including meeting with the devil. Like, she was like, these people were meeting with the devil. She had a whole elaborate story. According to a Smithsonian article titled Unraveling the Many Mysteries of Tituba, the star witness of the Salem Witch Trials. We love that for Tituba.
That's a move, though. If you're being accused of witchcraft, you're like, oh, no. I saw this, and this with these other poor people.
Yep.
Like, what's going to happen?
Exactly.
That's a great, that's a chess move in a game of checkers.
Exactly. Tituba knows what's up. But she submitted a vivid, lurid, and harebrained report. More than anyone else, she propelled America's infamous witch hunt forward, supplying its imagery and determining its shape. So basically, they just knew that these girls were having fits. They suspected witchcraft. The doctor was like, that's the only thing it could be. But Tituba really outlined it all with her long thing. She's describing the devil, how it came to her, the story, the imagery of like the animals that were involved in it. She said it, and now they're going to run with it and go with her story. Like, she was the first chapter.
Because I feel like when people lie, they try to keep it very vague so they could remember it over and over again. But when things get down to like the nitty gritty, you're like, oh, that's true.
But it's interesting because this article actually said she had a full-fledged story that was persuasive enough to propel the witch hunt forward. So apparently she was hauntingly specific, but she was also gloriously vague. So it was kind of like a strategy.
They left her like a little breadcrumb trail to the correct path. But she didn't make it obvious.
Exactly.
Smart.
According to one source, Tituba would retract every word of her sensational confession into which she claimed her master had bullied her into it.
Whoa.
This is way down the line.
So the first two ladies that, like the two 9-year-olds or whatever, that were like full of witchcraft, I don't know, bewitched, their slave is Tituba.
Yes.
And she's bewitched, but when they're all in trial, she turns on the other two people that were bewitched, but not her slave owners.
No.
Two poor people.
Yes.
Wow. There's some tea in Salem.
Yes, and this is kind of down the line, but just to kind of complete Tituba's arc, because, she's important here. She did apologize, saying she loved Betty and meant her no harm. She was questioned for 2 more days after the first day, but her confession, because she confessed, to the witchcraft, but also blamed it on these 2 other women, she was able to escape, being charged or whatever with anything, but she was imprisoned. And Reverend Parris promised to pay the fee to allow her out of prison, but Tituba recanted her confession, and so Parris never paid the fine, probably because he was like, okay, if you're going to recant that, then I'm not paying your fine. Someone eventually did pay for her fine, so they assume that the person, whoever did that, would be to enslave her, which is pretty sad. We don't know what happened to Tituba. I hope after her release, Little Miss Lady got the hell out of Salem and had somewhat of a good life after that. Who else was accused of it? Was it just Tituba? No, if it was just Tituba, then I wouldn't be having this podcast probably. Actually, I would. Accusations started to multiply and even spread to other communities outside of Salem. In March 1962, so, about
1692.
Oh my God, why do I keep doing that? Okay. In March, I even wrote it as 1962 on my notes here. Fixed it. In March 1692, 4 more women were accused, one just because the woman questioned whether the symptoms were even real, the symptoms that the girls were presenting. She was like, are these even real? And they were like, witch! A witch! Sorry. Who else was part of this accused list?
So one of the most infamous witches accused was Mary Easty. Mary Easty was a witch that was convicted. She is one of the more infamous witches because the first Conjuring movie was based off of her. It wasn't just her that was convicted, though. It was her and her sisters. Her sisters were supposedly seen doing witchcraft, but Mary never was. Mary was simply accused via her matriarchal... Yeah, she's guilty by association.
Oof. Hate to see it.
It's funny because you'd be like, oh, but the witch in The Conjuring is Bathsheba Sherman. That's not Mary Easterly. Well, it turns out Bathsheba Sherman was a real person who supposedly moved to this property.
I love that name for her.
Bathsheba, it's Hebrew. It's like an ancient name. But she was related to Mary Easty. How about that?
Oh. And was the siblings the only witch in the family? Why were they even accusing the siblings?
So all of the siblings were only accused because the mother was accused of witchcraft years prior.
Oh my God.
And according to the priest and according to the Witchcraft Act or whatever, the law, we'll get into that later, witchcraft runs on the matriarch.
Oh.
So if your mom's a witch, you're a witch.
Okay, but if your dad's a witch, it's like, nah.
Is that a warlock or a wizard?
I don't know. Another person that was accused simply because she wore black, and also villagers claimed that her clothes were odd.
Oh boy. Imagine if there were witch trials in New York City.
Oh, it'd be like... Oh.
Like people wear curtains and stuff.
Yes.
And I've seen a woman walking a man on a dog leash.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was I was concerned for his
Do you have
knees.
a video?
No,
No?
I don't know.
Oh.
Well, you throw up a photo.
Yeah, I wanted to. I was like, that's a good
I was really worried for his
idea.
knees. I feel like that's how you get a staph infection.
In the Salem Witch Trials, more than 200 people were accused in total. As everyone's being accused and turning in a few more people and a few more people, it's like exponential growth over here. And 54 of the accused actually admitted guilt to avoid death. A lot of the accused turned on neighbors, friends, and even family. I know, how sad, but Margaret Jacobs confessed to witchcraft and implicated others, including her own grandfather. Sorry,
Jeez.
Grandpa. If you're getting old, you're getting up there in age. You know, I got family to have, I got a life to live. But you know, if I'm gonna save myself, and you can kick the bucket or someone else could kick the bucket from under you while you're hanging from a tree. Poor little Dorothy Good was the youngest person accused in the Salem Witch Trials. At just 4 years old, she was thrown into jail, and it was extremely sad because her mother was also thrown into jail, accused of being a witch. She had a newborn infant baby, so Dorothy Good didn't have a good. Poor Dorothy Good was accused of being deranged and animalistic after consorting with the devil. Dorothy confessed her supposed crimes to the authorities and claimed to have seen her mother with the devil as well. Imagine being 4 years old and having to confess on trial, like, I am the devil, or my mom is the whatever.
How do you even get a 4-year-old to
speak? Like, did I speak at 4? I don't know. That probably is concerning. But that is crazy. And Dorothy's confession allowed her to be released on bond after nearly 7 months in prison. Her mother was hanged during Dorothy's jail time.
Jeez.
Yep. So several others, including Elizabeth Bassett Proctor and Abigail Faulkner, were convicted, but given temporary reprieves because they were pregnant. So at least, they had some type
But would that be a witch baby?
Ooh, yeah, that would be kind of worse, honestly. Charge them twice for the baby and them. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It was a joke. So since we talked about who was accused, let's go into what happened after they were accused. What was the sentencing like? How did that process happen in the courtroom?
This is a legal proceeding.
It is.
So this is something that is done in a courtroom with a judge or a magistrate because they are legally being accused and convicted and sentenced to death of witchcraft.
Exactly.
And
I was going to say, just a special court was actually even established specifically for the Salem Witch Trials because the witch trials were overwhelming like the normal court. There was just too many.
So one might ask, what are these witches being accused of?
Yeah.
These witches. They're being accused of breaking the Witchcraft Act of 1604, which served as the primary law enforcement from the English into all of their colonies. So England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, the United States. Well, it wasn't the United States yet, 1604. And it acted as, hey, if you think you're a witch, you can be sentenced to death. And the primary forms of punishment was if you were convicted of a minor offense, you could be imprisoned for up to a year. Okay. And if you were found guilty twice, so say you do 2 minor things, like, you turned a man into a goat twice.
Oh my God.
You're immediately sentenced to death.
Yeah. Wow.
But if it is a major offense, you're immediately sentenced to death.
Okay.
So this is how people actually were sentenced to death legally.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
So it's not like an angry mob, which I feel like most people probably think. This is a legal proceeding. That's the craziest part.
It was a legal proceeding, but it was interesting because huge crowds were eventually allowed in the courtroom, so it kind of was like a mess. They're just kind of making things up as they go. They have all these crazy tests that they were using, including the witch cake test, which basically, if a dog was fed a cake made with rye and the urine of an afflicted person, and it displayed, being the dog, the same symptoms as the victim, it indicated the presence of witchcraft. The dog was also supposed to then point to the people who had bewitched the victim.
If I can even get my dog...
Do you want a witch cake? You want some of my witch cakes? I can make you a witch cake this Halloween.
How you doing? How you
some
doing?
Urine? Okay.
Now, I was going to say, if I can get my dog to sit down, it's a good day, let alone point out a witch.
Yeah, well, I think a big part in why it was so easy for people to be accused and charged with crime of witchcraft and later hung was because the court allowed something called spectral evidence, which was testimony in which witnesses claimed that the accused appeared to them and did them harm in a dream or a vision. So, for example, if the accused was just standing in the room and the accuser, who's screaming in fits, was like, "Oh my God, she's doing it to me right now. She's making me hurt." Like, you can't see her hurting her. She's standing across the room, but the spectral evidence is just that the woman is claiming that she's hurting her, basically. It's invisible.
You can also say you dreamed that they did something in your dream. That's ridiculous.
Or like you dream that they danced with the devil or something. Like, that's enough evidence to be accused with witchcraft.
You're trying to steal some of my property. All of a sudden, I'm going to have some convenient dreams.
Exactly. So in addition to the witch cake test, they also had the touch test. So if the accused witch touched the victim while the victim was having a fit, just going, and if, the accused touched that person and the fit stopped, observers believe that meant that the accused was the person who had afflicted the victim, as several of those accused later recounted.
Obviously.
Yeah. In addition to the touch test, there was the witch's teat test, which we talked about a little bit earlier. I thought that this meant that William Griggs, that creepy, weird doctor, literally looked at women's nips and was like, "Ooh, this one's bubbling out this certain way," or whatever. But it was it was actually an observation of what were called witch's teats on the body of the accused, which was said to be a mole or a blemish somewhere on the body. Unfortunately, not just a super plump nip. But, but that part was insensitive to touch. Discovery of such insensitive areas was considered de facto evidence of witchcraft. So, I got a lot of not blemishes, like freckles on my body. So does that make me a witch, William Griggs? You gonna touch my witch's teat?
Now, I wonder if this is where colder than a witch's teat comes from.
It must.
It's something my mom says sometimes.
There's a lot of things that came from this. Hangman.
No.
Didn't know.
I think hanging's a little bit older than the witch trials.
Yeah, I know, but it's still funny.
You can go into that in a little bit.
If you were charged with witchcraft, what happened to you? Basically, you were sentenced to hanging, unfortunately, and 20 people lost their lives as a result of the Salem Witch Trials. These people specifically refused to admit guilt, so they kind of died, as some people like to say, martyrs.
There's something honorable about that, but like, come on, grow up. Just admit.
Oh, I'd be the first one to be like, "No, she made the witch cake. She peed in that cake. It wasn't me."
Now,
or whatever.
You did say 20 people died. It is important to note that 19 people were hung and one person was crushed by stones.
I know.
Now, imagine like if someone's crushing you with a stone, I would just be like, "I'm a witch, I'm a witch, I'm a witch."
I know, and you know what I found out about that person?
Oh, no.
They were like 80.
Oh, jeez.
And it like happened over the course of like 2 days.
They like slowly crushed them?
Yeah, and their like nose was bleeding, or I forgot what it was, but it just wasn't pretty, okay? But let's, I mean, we already kind of went into that, but the first person that was killed by the Salem Witch Trials or during the Salem Witch Trials was Bridget Bishop. And when she was asked if she had committed witchcraft, she said, "I am as innocent as the child unborn." And she was hanged later, a few days later, on what is now known as Gallows Hill. So even though she claimed she was innocent, that didn't work, honey. Sorry, Bridgie. I keep making jokes about this, which maybe I shouldn't, but it is we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's not funny how this happened. I mean, it's funny to make jokes about certain things, but it's not funny in a sense that this just happened kind of in a crazy way where people started accusing everyone that they knew, based on no logic, no evidence. These accusations were made. The only evidence we'll talk about this, I keep saying, but these little girls that were just yelling and screaming and claiming that other people were torturing them or whatever, they were possessed by the devil. So it was really horrible, honestly, and hope this never happens and people don't have this mass hysteria, is what they call it, even though there are some like allegories from the Salem Witch Trials to things like communism or something. 19 people were hung, as you said. 1 people were crushed, but no one was actually burned at the stake during the Salem Witch Trials. This was more or less during like the medieval witch trials. This wasn't the Salem Witch Trials, unless we just didn't know about any of them, unless Reverend Parris and that weird doctor were like burning people. But there's no evidence that anyone was burned at the stake.
And that's kind of disappointing. Not in like, not in that way.
It's kind of disappointing.
But like when you think,
you didn't have the balls.
When you think of the Salem Witch Trials, even on Google Images, I'm pretty sure it's like a woman getting burned at the stake.
I literally was watching like a YouTube video on the Salem Witch Trials to, prepare for
this. And the thumbnail had the witch. I watched that too.
Burning.
Like, get out of here.
Like,
it's literally like,
fake.
do 5 minutes of research.
As he made like an hour-long documentary. But yeah, that is a little... Maybe the editor, and he didn't catch it in the edit.
Oh.
But 2 dogs were also killed based on the suspicions of witchcraft. So it wasn't just people that were killed during the Salem Witch. I love how I'm more upset about that. I'm like, 2 poor dogs that were like claimed to have the devil in them. Like, dogs are the best things that have happened to humanity. If you want to argue that with me, come at me. They are. So no, they don't have the devil in them. Get out of here. There were 4 execution dates in total within 4 months. So every month, imagine living that. Imagine being in a town where it's like, some random people were killed last month, and the week's coming where they're going to have another trial and another whatever and another hanging, and you're like waiting for that moment. I would be terrified. People are probably gossiping, like, you're churning butter, and you're like, did you hear? And they're like, what? And you're like, did you hear that Sarah Maya and Josephina are charged with witchcraft? And you're like, oh, like that happened. I mean, that didn't happen. That happened. There's proof. I just gave it to you. No. Imagine waiting for that. What would you think? What would you be?
There would be a lot of tea. There would definitely be a lot of tea going around because there's no, like, all you can do is read a book or gossip.
I know. And one of the people that was killed during the Salem Witch Trials was actually a Puritan minister, which is pretty crazy to think, and I thought was important to point out because out of all these people, right, there's the neighbors, there's the farmer, there's the owner of the shop downtown or whatever, but then there's also Puritan ministers, which is the religion of all of these people in this town. And so it's like, why would they even let this happen, right? Which is interesting because while he was going up to the ladder for, to be hung, he was saying the Lord's Prayer during this. And a lot of the crowd was actually kind of like, stop, a witch cannot say the Lord's Prayer. They believe this.
Yeah.
They almost kind of intervened. However, another Puritan prime minister, Cotton Mather, Cotton Mather, literally get out of here. No one likes you. But he apparently they did, because he told the crowd reciting the prayer is actually a diabolical trick. So he's saying, this Puritan minister who's getting ready to be hung, he's just, the devil is just working in mysterious ways, like whatever. And then they just hung him.
That's
like a few
ridiculous.
seconds later. So it just continued on.
If you were to look at it from like an outsider perspective, from our view, it's very obvious. But when you're in the moment, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah. I could see how it happens. And out of everybody there, I feel as if it's very easy to admit guilt. I mean, however, 500, 200 people were accused. Only 20 people were stubborn enough to die. One of them being that minister. I could see the minister being too proud, a man of God, not admitting to be partaking in witchcraft versus the woman.
Yeah.
Who could just, who's not a minister, just admit it and not get killed. But
yeah. That's true.
Kind of selfish at that point.
Yeah. No, not selfish. Selfish of him?
Selfish of people to not just admit it.
Why?
I don't know. Why would you just let your family have, like, say your mother was being accused of witchcraft. And she was too proud to admit it.
That's okay. Admit it? What do you mean, too proud to admit it?
If you admit that you're guilty, they don't kill you.
Yeah.
The people who didn't, they only...
the point for these people. So
they're
going to
die over that?
I mean, some people want to, I guess. And this might be a little graphic, even though I've already gotten to be graphic, so I'm sorry. But the hangings weren't quick hangings where a neck would just be instantly broken as soon as, they were pushed off the ladder. But instead, it was strangulation. So during this strangulation, when someone is hung, they will usually flail around, kind of like seize a little bit. You know, I don't know if you've seen movies like Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever. You look like a fish out of water, basically. It's very disturbing. Not that I've seen it, but, you know, I've seen Pirates of the Caribbean. But these people watching these hangings, whenever the Reverend, you know, actually was pushed off and flailed like a fish, people were like, oh my God, he was possessed by the devil. They thought the flailing was like the devil leaving the body.
No, yeah.
It's like, are you kidding me? And then what happened with the guy that was crushed? Maybe the blood. They were like, oh, the blood. That's the devil leaving the body. Like, they just kept keeping going on and on
Incidents
and on.
of convenience over and over and over again.
Exactly. That's so true. That's a great point. I haven't really built this out super well because there's not actually so many documents or books about the Salem Witch Trials, because after the Salem Witch Trials, they kind of tried to hide it a little bit, where they made people burn books on it or texts or documents or newspapers.
This was the first government cover-up.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Exactly. So there's not a lot to kind of like piece together to make a conspiracy about it. Not that that's what we're going with. But
think how far we've come in cover-ups.
Yes, exactly. What caused the girls to act possessed and have these fits that no one could diagnose, right? Like, was it real? Or did they have any type of demonic entities in them? Probably not. It seems like everyone in this town was just all of a sudden getting these crazy fits. So we have to think of another alternative, right?
Yeah, I think it's mental illness mixed with mass hysteria.
Yeah. But I think that it has to do with the Reverend Parris.
Really?
I think he was the center, and I'm not like I'm not going to claim I'm the first person to think this. I think there are other people that kind of outline this story. But basically, Reverend Parris, people in the village or whatever you wanted to call Salem, wanted him out. He wanted his money. People were debating on getting him out to being the Reverend and moving someone else in. I want to say like the fall before January, where the Salem Witch Trials started, people were talking about getting rid of this Reverend Parris. And then all of a sudden in January, Reverend Parris's own daughter starts having crazy fits of the devil. And Reverend Parris had all of his sermons kind of focused on the devil and like, we need to be ready for the devil and we need to be prepared to fight the devil. He
sounds like a TikTok Wendy's preacher.
Exactly. Like, he was really into this whole theme and concept. So if your dad, who's a reverend, is always talking about this, talking probably to everyone in the town about this whenever they go into I don't even know what they go to. Do they have a store?
A church?
A church?
Church.
Well, no, I know they're a church, but where do they buy their bread? Do they all make their bread?
Stores? I don't know.
They had stores?
Well, they didn't have like a Target, but
imagine. And I'll pull it up. Okay. No, but whatever. When the Reverend Parris,
a baker, I'm sure. I don't know.
If his 9-year-old impressionable daughter, heard all this talk about the devil, maybe she would be like, oh, maybe I am possessed by the devil. If he's talking about people potentially getting possessed by the devil, why wouldn't she like all of a sudden start feeling that way? Or maybe it's like manifesting in her because
or she's trying to get attention.
Or Reverend Parris was like, do you want a good butter churner this year for Christmas? Then you better put your best demonic voice on and get acting, baby, because we're going to pretend.
But it's interesting because I don't see how they would benefit from accusing Tituba, their slave, of being possessed.
Well, maybe they accused Tituba, right? Because she was close to the family or whatever, so they can control what her response was.
Well, she's also a slave, so she has zero rights.
Exactly.
It's a pretty easy victim to blame.
Yeah, so they blame her, but maybe, after they blame her, they say, okay, if you confess and blame these 2 other women, you'll be free. And then it started. Boom, it started. Because Tituba did recant her profession. No, I don't think she could. She recanted her. It wasn't supposed to be a joke. She recanted her confession, saying Parris actually bullied her into confessing. So she said that. Why would she say that? Why would she just randomly accuse him out of all people? She could have said, "Oh, this person, this." I guess it was probably the most believable if your like slave.
Definitely, your master
told you that. But I don't know. I believe that he bullied her into it.
I think he bullied her into it, and then they picked 2 other poor people that had no social hierarchy, and they picked those other individuals, and accused them. Real quick.
And didn't mention this while talking about it before, but in addition to Betty Parris, Reverend Parris's daughter, one girl named Ann Putnam, who was 13 years old. Her father was Thomas Putnam, an ally of, guess who? Reverend Parris. And Thomas Putnam also blamed his misfortune on the devil. And he was kind of like stick in the mud kind of guy, always like mad. And Ann Putnam said Tituba cast a spell on her. So she was in on this whole thing with Betty Parris. They're family friends.
You could say anybody cast a spell on anyone.
Exactly, but both of them are saying that Tituba. So what if Thomas Putnam is like, Ann Putnam, honey, daughter, you want a butter churner this year? That's the only thing I could think of that these people played with. I don't know what they used. Do you want a bonnet this year, lady? Then you better say that Tituba cast a spell on you, right? Like, why would they both come to this consensus?
Yeah.
Ann Putnam also accused 2 female neighbors. They turned on a well-regarded church member, Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse was only 70. I mean, only. I meant like only being like she was so innocent. She was 71 years old. Like, what's a 71-year-old woman going to do?
And if you're 71 in 1696 or whatever, that's old.
Yeah. So, she's accusing this woman who's like a, well-rounded, good community kind of woman.
A proper geezer.
Yeah, sure. Proper churchgoer, right? And it was kind of, I think this was the first person that was like well-respected, loved in the community that was accused. So why Rebecca Nurse? Why would they do that to her? Well, Putnam family and the Nurse family refuted on property boundaries for years before. So their homes were right next to each other, and they were like, where's the property?
So now we've got like 4 or 5 accusations, and they're all nonsense.
Yeah, who cares where your property line is? This is Salem in 1620. Like, what, do you want a few more acres of corn?
Now I don't know if they grew corn then.
They probably didn't.
And probably not in that region.
Maybe more butter churn storage.
Irrelevant.
Churn.
What I think is relevant is how incredibly convenient it is to just accuse somebody you don't like or with low social standards or hierarchy of being a witch. And you're like, it's fun.
Yeah. Although they're not innocent, but they're kids. Like, they're 9, 11, 13. Like, yes, I'm sure they eventually saw that them doing that resulted in people being murdered. But I don't think they fully understood the consequences of it. I mean, not for them, but the consequences for other people. I think that their parents were kind of leading this. Thomas filed a complaint on behalf of his daughter against poor Rebecca Nurse, and Rebecca Nurse was eventually hung for this, despite her being, the churchgoer and loved member of the community that she was, which is really messed up and sad that poor 71-year-old Rebecca Nurse was murdered because of a little girl's accusations that had no evidence whatsoever. Random, but this is a comment from a YouTube video I saw, but it had a lot of upvotes. I feel like it's worth noting, but I liked it. I don't know why I didn't think of it myself, but they said the real demonic activity was not by the accused, but by the accusers and the ones doing the hanging and torturing. The devil was at work here, just not in the way they all thought. And it wasn't until the damage was done did the truth come to light, and I find that very sad.
Damn.
It's true. Like, the devil was at work.
That's so heavy.
During this. Except it was the people that were believing in the mass hysteria, not sticking up for their neighbors and whatnot, the people that were getting hung, that were claiming innocence. Like, if everyone in the town was like, this is stupid, then, like, Reverend Parris would have no power. They'd be like, we're not paying your wage.
Mass hysteria doesn't work like that.
I know.
And it's interesting to kind of go into a different case. There was the plague in July of 1518. The dancing plague began in modern day France. Is at the time the Roman Empire, and people basically danced for weeks.
That's crazy.
Hundreds of people danced for weeks and weeks and weeks. There's a couple of conflicting reports on whether or not people died from dancing, but I could imagine people would dance to death.
Yeah, dehydration.
Not the worst way to go out. Dancing. Mass hysteria knows no bounds. Yes. And so when it comes to something religious in a highly religious society like a witch, I could see people just jumping on board.
Definitely. And if those listening don't know what mass hysteria is, it refers to a contagious dissociative phenomena that takes place in large groups of people or institutions under conditions of anxiety. Typically, they're described as taking place in schools where episodes of illnesses or fainting appear to spread rapidly throughout the school. Well, that's random, but okay.
Interesting.
There were a lot of other people, obviously, that were accused, some that actually died in prison. And I didn't mention all of the people that were hung. Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. That's terrible.
It's terrible.
They were killed for no reason. If you were to get 20 TikTokers and say, you're a witch, you have to admit to being a witch, or we're going to crush you with stones, they'd be done in 5 minutes. There wouldn't even be a trial. Before people could even come into the courtroom, they'd be like, I'm a witch.
Yeah, that's so random. You said TikTokers.
I don't know.
Like a
I was just thinking
hype house, but like you have to vote each other off, kind of thing.
But who's
like,
a witch?
Yeah.
Oh, I love
the
that.
Salem Witch Trials.
Now we could sell this to Netflix.
Don't copy us. How did this all stop? The trials lasted 7 months, spanning between 1692 and 1693. Local authorities, including the governor of the province of Massachusetts Bay, Sir William Phips, allowed the hysteria to continue long enough to kill many innocent people, unfortunately. However, when Sir Phips' wife, Lady Mary Phips, was accused of witchcraft, that all stopped. The governor worked quickly to eliminate spectral evidence from the trial, but in a matter of weeks, the trials were over and those awaiting trial or execution were released. The court they created for the Salem Witch Trials was dissolved on October 29th. Can you believe it? The same year that they started. I can't believe that it happened so quickly, but so, intense, I guess, that all of these people were died, accused, etc. It took up their whole lives, probably. They did nothing else but this. So let's talk about what happened after these witch trials. Did everyone just go back to their normal business? After the hysteria was over, Massachusetts actually recognized the witch trials for what they were and began a centuries-long process of atonement. Judges, juries, and accusers publicly apologized, but the apologies were of little comfort to affected families. By 1711, the state had exonerated the accusers from all wrongdoing and offered monetary compensations to surviving family members. For example, William Good, whose poor little 4-year-old daughter, I forgot her name. What was her name? Dorothy, I remember. Dorothy Good, she was in prison at 4. The wife was lost, an infant daughter was lost while imprisoned. He actually received the largest settlement. The husband. It doesn't say. I forgot what it was.
2 shillings.
Yeah.
You are
5 butter churners.
You are offered 2 shillings, 5 butter churners for your wife's death. Hear, hear.
In 2002, the Massachusetts State Legislature officially cleared the names of the last of the accused witches. It said that, but then I just saw an article a few days ago that someone in their high school or college or whatever was actually clearing someone's name. From the Salem Witch Trials.
No one was guilty. Get out of here.
But it's the point, okay? Arthur Miller wrote the 1953 play, which you might be familiar with, called The Crucible. Though this play was not historically accurate. I think John Proctor or whatever was portrayed as a young, hot man, but he was 70 or something.
How you doing?
He was in love with this woman who was actually 11 in real life. So the Crucible wasn't supposed to be historically accurate. It was just kind of using the Salem Witch Trials to display another story, which was an allegory for communism, I believe.
Whoa.
I know. Crazy.
That's another podcast.
One of the most concrete studies published in Science in 1976 by psychologist Linda Caporael blamed the abnormal habits of the accused on fungus.
It's interesting because they blamed the dancing plague on fungus too.
Yeah, why fungus? Fungus is not a fungi during these times.
Yeah, well, for the dancing plague, they blamed they accidentally made LSD and everybody was tripping balls and just kept dancing, which is funny. It reminds me of a Dead show where people are spinning for hours until they literally get carted off in an ambulance.
Maybe
I've seen it. We've seen it.
Fungus bread. No,
we should eat fungus bread and go to a Dead show.
We should. It was called fungus ergot, or ergot, which can be found in rye, wheat, and other cereal grasses. Toxicologists say that eating ergot-contaminated foods can lead to muscle spasms, vomiting, delusions, and hallucinations. Also, the fungus thrives in warm and damp climates, not too unlike the swampy meadows in Salem Village, where rye was the staple grain during the spring and summer months. Yeah, well, it started in January, so how are you going to explain that? Huh?
Well, they
wasn't swampy then.
They store bread for the year.
Oh, but was it warm and damp? Oh, it would have been warm and damp, and they would have been eating it before.
Yeah, it would have grown.
Whatever, fine, sure.
It sounded just like a Dead show. Warm, damp, hallucinations.
True. Today, many people love visiting Salem, all the fun little things. I even want to go to Salem, but the Airbnbs are like crazy. The hotels are crazy expensive. But that just shows the demand for it. People go dressing up as witches, seeing the Salem Witch Museum, and other fun memorials and places to go.
None of them are witches. What's the point of going? To go see where they hung 20 people?
Yeah, it's just the vibe. You know, I think they have like little restaurants and little
okay.
fun things. Yeah.
It's expensive though.
Really random. This is like not important, but fun fact, there are actually a lot of Salem Witch Trial descendants that are famous.
No kidding.
Sarah Jessica Parker, while doing her research into her family history, she found out that she's the 10th great-granddaughter of Esther Elwell, who was accused of witchcraft but escaped trial after prosecution for witchcraft was abolished.
So think about it this way, though. There were 200 people accused.
George Bush, apparently.
He was in Skull and Bones. That is witchcraft, my friend. I guess he's a warlock, probably.
Alexander McQueen dedicated his autumn-winter 2007-2008 collection after his long-lost relative Elizabeth Hoe, who was hanged in... Okay, this literally says hanged in 1962.
It says that?
The article on MSN.com says 1962, so it's not just me. Walt Disney, apparently, Clara Barton, Mark Wahlberg, whoa, we love that for him, Tom Felton, Lucille Ball were also apparently related descendants to the Salem Witch Trial people, whether it be the judge, I think that was Mark Wahlberg's great something.
That's not the guy you want to be related to.
I know, you're like, oh. That is it, you guys, for the Salem Witch Trial podcast. I hope you guys liked it. Please like this video, comment down below any suggestions, just literally anything you want to see from us in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you can see other videos from us. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!